is CNN Breaking News.
Tonight, if President Trump's Twitter account is an accurate read, he's got a lot on his mind. In the last 24 hours, give or take, he has tweeted about immigration reform, North Korea, his approval rating, the cold weather, the U.S. Postal Service. What does this all mean for the new year? Out front now, former communications director for President Trump's transition team, Brian Lanza, and former Philadelphia Mayor Michael Nutter. Nice to have you both here, gentlemen. And Brian, because you know the mind of the president, having been his communications director, help me understand what this all portends for the new year.
You know, this is what a high-energy president means. They're working on a lot of things. They're working through a lot of items, and that's obviously reflected on his Twitter in the last 36 hours, whether it's the polls, whether it's the post office, you know, whether it's climate change. I mean, this is a very active president.
The post office?
You saw his tweet about the post office?
Yeah, he thinks Amazon is ripping off the post office.
Well, I think the post office has been a defunct government entity for a long time, and it needs to fix itself, and that may result in higher postal rates. You know, as a true businessman, he's looking at the model and saying it doesn't work, it's failing, we have pensions are responsible for. How do we make sure we fund it going forward? This has nothing to do with Amazon. This has everything to do with the post office that has been a 10, 15-year problem for government.
All right, he wrote about Amazon in the tweet, but Mayor, how do you see it?
Thanks, Bobby. Nice try, Brian. It would just be nice, out of all of that, beyond doing public policy over Twitter, if the president could actually work on some things that truly matter to the American people, like unemployment in many communities, like infrastructure, like trying to bring the country together, not just talking to the 30 or so percent of folks that represent his base. So, you know, I mean, he's kind of like a Twitter machine at this point, but it's all about distraction. All of it, of course, reflects back on him. I mean, so if it's not about him, it's not worth talking about in his mind, in his sickness. So, you know, none of it makes any sense.
I will say a lot of Americans wanted tax reform. It happened. This isn't an overly popular bill, I will say that, but he did get tax
The majority
tax
are opposed to it. But
Brian, in this interview with the New York Times, he said something stunning, and let me read it to you. And here's his words. Another reason that I'm going to win in another 4 years is because newspapers, television, all forms of media will tank if I'm not there, because without me, their ratings are going to go down the tube. So basically, they have to let me win. It went on from there. I mean, he is saying that he thinks the media is going to throw the election to him. Putting aside the fact that the media can't do that, doesn't do that, what do you make of that statement?
Yeah, listen, I'm in Sacramento, California right now, where we had a celebrity governor, Schwarzenegger, and he learned something, and I learned something from him very early on, that the media loves these types of headlines with their celebrity politicians, whether it's Arnold Schwarzenegger or President Trump. And so, you know, he is living in the media's head rent-free right now. Everything the media does is try to cover it in 13 different angles when he's just speaking very linearly to you. So I think there is some truth to that the media needs Trump to be successful, just like the California media needed Arnold Schwarzenegger to be successful. And because let's be honest, the other candidates that the Democrats are putting forward are actually rather boring candidates. They don't excite anything. They don't represent anything other than anti-Trump. They don't represent any core values other than just against something. So I think there is a lot of truth that the media needs Donald Trump to keep their success going, very similar to like the media needed Arnold Schwarzenegger in California. What
he's saying, though, Mayor Nutter, is that he thinks that the media will throw the election, that the media would somehow try to give him the election, as if the media, you know, has not. I mean, the media has covered this president very fairly, and he says it's not fair, it's fake news, et cetera. And now he's saying the media is going to help him win.
Yeah, again, it's the contradictions that flow through his mind. He contradicts his own contradictions. This is absurd, as you tried to point out to Brian. What the media needs is a truthful president. What the media needs is actually to calm the country down a little bit and start to bring people together, as opposed to much of the divisiveness that Donald Trump represents. And so he has no theory of governing, and apparently ignores the fact that actually voters put elected officials in office or take them out of office, notwithstanding whatever their media coverage may be. But, you know, again, he's talking about polls, he's talking about the DOJ, he's talking about he just runs his mouth on a regular basis, none of which leads to a child getting an education or, a person actually getting a job who's been unemployed for a long period of time or repairing bridges and roads. That would be like work.
Well, he's talked about infrastructure.
To sit at your desk and do something. He talks about it. He hasn't done anything about it.
All right, let's see. He says they're going to do this in the new year. Let's wait. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's see what happens.
We'll see.
Brian, to you, on the approval ratings, here's what the president tweeted today. My rating December 28, 2017 was approximately the same as Obama's December 28, 2009, which was 47%. He's talking about a Rasmussen poll. It does not meet CNN's polling standards, but here are 4 polls that do. CNN's poll shows in that same period of time at the end of the first year for President Trump, 35%, 54% for President Obama. Gallup, 38% for Trump, 51% for Obama. CBS, 36% for Trump, 50% for Obama. Quinnipiac, 37% for Trump, 46% for Obama. You get where I'm going here. Those are the numbers. Those meet our polling standards. My question to you, why this insistence on comparing himself to President Obama?
Let's address the polls. I mean, the Rasmussen poll last election was probably the closest one to pick picked President Trump as being the winner. So he's going back to what was the most accurate of the last election cycle. CNN didn't hit that mark, and NBC didn't hit that mark, and neither did Gallup poll hit that mark. So let's start with that. So he's going off something there. And then the second thing is everybody talks about the president's obsessed with President Obama. The president made a promise to the American people to undo a lot of the dangerous policies of President Obama, and he's keeping his promise. I know that's unique and bizarre to politicians in Washington, D.C. keeping their promise, but this guy's a business guy, and he knows how to achieve goals. And that was his goal that was a promise he made to the American people, and that's been his singular focus. It's not necessarily focused on Obama, it's focusing on the promises he made to the American people. And I got to tell you, it's enlightening and it's different and it's very refreshing.
So, Mayor, Brian clearly thinks all those polls I put up are wrong. What do you say?
Yeah. Well, of
no,
course
that's not what I said. I said Rasmussen was the most
accurate.
I didn't say they were wrong.
All right, you don't think they're as accurate, even though they're as Rasmussen. What do you say,
Mayor? The election was proof
that
those polls were wrong.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he took the one that best made his case, but clearly the president's also having some math problems, which he clearly could not have learned all his lessons at Wharton here in Philadelphia. Everything is going to be what's in his best interest. Size of crowd, big as this, big as that. He's intimidated, actually, by President Obama. And if you had time, Poppy, you could put up the clip of when Donald Trump visited the White House and President Obama graciously welcomed him. He couldn't even look him in the eye. So he is intimidated and envious of the record of President Barack Obama and is constantly trying to compare himself to people who have been successful.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much. Have a good New Year's. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Poppy.
Thank you.
All right,
Happy New Year's.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Also in that interview with the New York Times, the president was asked if he would order the Justice Department to reopen the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. Here's how the president responded, quote, I have the absolute right to do what I want to do with the Justice Department, but for purposes of hopefully thinking I'm going to be treated fairly, I've stayed uninvolved with this particular matter. Our legal analyst, Paul Callan, is here. Let's tick through this. So, Paul, he says he has the absolute right to do whatever he wants with the Justice Department. True?
True and false. He is the person in charge of the Justice Department. So, for instance, he could order them to divert resources from one investigation to another or to terminate an investigation. He can do that. However, if the purpose of terminating the investigation is to protect himself or to punish an enemy, that could be viewed as an abuse of power and or an obstruction of justice. So, as I say, it's yes and no, because if he's giving a legitimate order, it has to be followed, but you can also commit an act of criminality in that context.
He also, in the context of the Attorney General and the Justice Department, spoke about loyalty and his disappointment with his own Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, for recusing himself from the Russia investigation. And then he went on to compare the relationship between he and Sessions to President Obama and former Attorney General Eric Holder. And he said, Holder protected President Obama, totally protected him. When you look at things that they did, Holder protected the president, and I have great respect for that. I'll be honest. Objectively speaking, is it the role of an attorney general to protect a president?
it's really a strange answer for him to give because he's continuing his attack on Jeff Sessions. I thought he was going to ease up on that, but really what he's saying is Obama had a great attorney general who was loyal to him, but mine has not been. And frankly, it's very, very unusual to see a president attacking his own attorney general in a continuing way like this. But, you know, Poppy, this entire interview was so strange. The other thing that I thought was really bizarre was him now praising the fairness of Mueller. And as a former prosecutor, it reminds me of the use of the good guy, bad guy routine. Remember, Trump's people have been attacking Mueller relentlessly for conducting an unfair investigation. And now the president is saying, well, it's a fair investigation. It's sort of, he's acting like, you know, the good guy, and his spokespeople are acting like the bad guy in a criminal interrogation.
Yeah. For now. He
For
says
now.
that
Yes.
he thinks Mueller is being fair. He's called this a witch hunt so many times before. Paul Calland, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
With me now, CNN political commentator Symone Sanders and Alice Stewart. And Alice, let me begin with you. I mean, just on Paul Calland's comments, I mean, what do you make of the fact that the president said, look, I think Mueller is going to be fair on this? In an investigation, he is deemed a witch hunt so many times.
I think he should repeat that one line over and over and over and over again and put a big period at the end of that sentence and say nothing else about the Russia investigation. Probably, let me just say from a communications standpoint, anytime you have any elected official meeting with any reporter without any press team present for 30 minutes, it makes my heart beat really fast, and I have shell shocks thinking about what could possibly have come out of this. But look, I think he was right to say that he thinks he will be treated fair by Mueller. I think reiterating that there is no collusion 16 times may help convince some of the base, but that's not going to change the outcome of this investigation. But I think overall, I think it was important for him to get out, say at least one positive comment about Mueller, despite the fact that many others in the GOP are being critical of the investigation. And I think given what could have happened, I think this was a really nice outcome given the potential of something like this.
He also said 16 separate times in this half-an-hour sit-down with the New York Times that there was no collusion. Look, that's part of what's being investigated. Symone, one thing that stood out to me, you know, for you as a Democrat who worked with Bernie Sanders, he said virtually every Democrat has said there is no collusion. What did you think when you read that?
I mean, I think Donald Trump is reaching here. Look, I think that there is there's a few questions to answer with the Russia investigation. A Russia investigation, from questions that you've asked Trump supporters and other people out there that you know is not necessarily an electoral issue just yet. Folks are not going to the ballot box voting on Donald Trump and Russia. But I think some of the questions that this investigation will answer is yes, was there collusion? Were there attempts to collude? Was there obstruction of justice? And those answers have not been concluded just yet. So it's incorrect, actually, for the president to note that has been an outcome of this investigation.
So many things to go through here. I do find it interesting, Alice. You know, another part of what the president said on the Russia investigation is timing-wise. He doesn't know when Mueller's probe will wrap up, and he didn't seem to feel any urgency in it getting done. He did say it's bad for America that it's going on, but the White House counsel has said, we think this is going to wrap up at the end of the year. Now they're pushing it to right after the new year. It seems like he's on a very different page than his own White House counsel on this. Does that matter?
I think we're going to always have conflicting desires for when this will wrap up. Clearly, in my view, I think his counsel is telling him things will wrap up quickly just to satisfy the president. He wants it to. I think it's in the country's best interest if it wraps up quickly. But at the same time, I think they just need to stop talking about it. They need to quit trying to anticipate the outcome and anticipate the timing of this. Let Robert Mueller do his job. And if the administration is accurate and that they have done nothing wrong, then let the facts play out. Let it lead to its conclusion. I think it's important not to prejudge the outcome of this, but I think he should do, as he's done the last month or so, focus on meaningful legislation, meaningful, more issues like tax reform, now infrastructure, and let's just put the Russia investigation on the back burner right now and let Mueller do his job.
So he did. We'll see if he doesn't talk about the Russia investigation. I'm not so sure about that. But Symone, he did talk a great deal in this interview about bipartisanship and working with Democrats. Here's part of what he said. Dems should come to me on infrastructure. They should come to me on DACA. We're trying to do something about it. They should definitely come to me on health care because we can do bipartisan on health care. We can do bipartisan on infrastructure. We can do bipartisan on DACA. You know, 12 hours after this interview, he just tweeted this morning and said, no DACA deal without a wall. I mean, is this genuine hope for bipartisanship?
So I do think the president genuinely hopes that that Democrats would come to him to strike a deal. I want him to know that no one's coming begging and groveling to Donald Trump, asking him to do something. He's confused. The Republicans are in charge of both chambers of Congress, so the House of Representatives and the Senate. The reason that nothing has gotten done up until tax reform has been because Republicans couldn't get their stuff together, not because Democrats were, quote unquote, obstructing. Democrats are more than happy to work with this administration and their Republican colleagues on the Hill. The problem is they say things like, we want bipartisanship, and then they say, well, we want to overhaul and get rid of Obamacare. Well, that's not happening, and no Democrat is coming to the table to do that. They say things like, we want to save the dreamers, and then Donald Trump tweets things such as he tweeted this morning about a border wall. Democrats are not going to vote for a border wall in conjunction with saving dreamers, DACA recipients, who this is the only country they know. So I think the president needs to kind of retool his negotiating skills here. But Democrats are more than willing to come to the table. But be clear, Republicans don't have their caucus together, and that's why nothing is getting done.
Is that a correct or... I mean, Alice, just when you think about the calculation the president's making here, he's saying no DACA deal without a wall. I mean, you do have, I think it's 83% of Americans polled want to see a solution for dreamers here. So, you know, it's more than just his base.
Sure, and I think just one clarification. I think we started out this year, yes, the GOP was all over the map and they didn't work together. I think they have learned they have to get something done. The GOP now is united with working together, especially with House and Senate members are working together. That's why we have tax reform. And it is critical with a lot of these issues moving forward, whether it's infrastructure or DACA, that they do work more closely with Democrats. And DACA is an important issue, but the president has made it quite clear anything that has any remote connection to national security with regard to immigration, he wants to build the wall. And if he has to tie that in with DACA, he's going to do that. And I also think if we're talking about DACA, he's also going to be talking about putting an end to chain migration, which is a key priority for this administration. So I think everyone's going to have to be willing to concede and work together. If you want DACA, you also have to consider the wall and chain migration.
But Poppy, there's something important to be said here in the fact that, like, the dreamers and the issues of immigration, phrases like chain migration negate the fact that these are real people and real families that we're talking about. These are real young people who have been in this country, who have paid their taxes, and the administration is not approaching immigration from a humane perspective. And so Democrats are not voting for a border wall. They're not voting for, quote unquote, ending chain migration. And that rhetoric is going to tank this deal, and it's going to have Donald Trump signing an executive order on DACA. Watch.
We'll be watching. Really quickly, though, I did want to get you on this, Alice, and that is the president coming out and mocking climate change and equating it to weather, which is two very different things, climate and weather, last night, talking about the extreme cold in this tweet, saying in the East it could be the coldest New Year's on record. Perhaps we could use a little bit of that good old global warming that our country, but not other countries, was going to pay trillions of dollars to protect against. Bundle up. Either he doesn't understand that there's a difference between weather and climate, or he doesn't care, but also it seems like he's making it very clear that he's not a believer in climate change, which we were trying to get clarity from him on and the White House on for a really long time.
I think he's been very clear that with regard to climate change that he does think it's a hoax. He thinks it's a very expensive tax that has been implied on many people. But the big question that is really difficult to get a firm response is whether or not it is man-made. And that is something that we're still trying to get from. But I think with regard to global warming and climate change, I think he made his position very clear by pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord and making sure that we do what's in the best interest of Americans, and I think we're going to continue to see that. He clearly doesn't believe in global warming. He thinks climate change is a hoax, and we're certainly not going to get any change of him on that. He's been quite clear on where he stands.
And he's wrong.
Alice, Simone, appreciate it.
This is CNN Breaking News.
New tonight, President Trump touting the strength of the stock market as an indicator of economic growth during his first year of the presidency. Today, the Dow closing the year out 24,719. That is up nearly 25% since the president took office. The president certainly likes to remind people about it.
The stock market has gone up massively since the election.
The stock market since our election is through the roof.
The stock market hit an all-time record high today.
The stock market is at an all-time high. The stock market is at an all-time high. Our stock market is at an all-time high.
He's right. It is. The Dow has hit more record highs this year than in any previous year. It is right near that record 25,000 mark. It builds, though, on the huge gains we've seen for the market during President Obama's final years in office. How does it all measure up? Out front now, former senior economic advisor to the Trump campaign, Stephen Moore, and Democratic strategist and author of The Essential Bernie Sanders, His Vision for America, Jonathan Tasini. Nice to have you both here. Stephen, let me begin with you because you advise the president on all things economic and economy and markets. Here is what some of the president's biggest supporters in that key state of Michigan, which he flipped, told me when I asked them, does this president get credit for the remarkable market rise? Look. Does the president get credit for the stock market?
No, he does, because he doesn't run any of these companies, okay?
But he takes a lot of credit for it.
This is America. These companies have come to fruition and come to be major billion-dollar corporations because of the American people, not Mr. Trump.
Does he get credit for the rise in the stock market?
I believe he does, because I think a lot of the investment, a lot of the things that happen in the stock market are related to what people see and think are going to happen in the future.
What do you think, Stephen Moore?
Well,
Who's
I
right?
agree with the second gentleman there. Look, I think that it's undeniable there has been a Trump effect on the stock market, Poppy. After all, you know, you showed that one chart showing the stock market's up 25% since, I think, I don't know if that was beginning of the year or when he was inaugurated, but really the starting point was, remember what happened the day after Trump was elected. The stock market went up 700 points, which was one of the biggest days for the stock market in the history.
But Obama's
of the
went up
New York Stock
31% in the same period, Stephen.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take the same period between,
so
if you're trying to say that any president has control of stock, which by the way, on a bipartisan basis, I would say no president should get credit for that. But if we're talking about the actual record,
why do you think the stock market went up? Why do you think the stock market went up 700 points the day after the election?
The bull market has been going on since 2009.
700 points in one day.
If you want to actually talk about what the effect has been over time, you should actually give it to Barack Obama, not to Donald Trump, if you go back to 2009. And as I said, in the same period from Obama's inauguration, if you take the same period and Trump's inauguration, it actually went up higher as a percentage. And so, and the other point to make...
Hold on, guys, one at a time. Stephen Moore.
The other point to make, Stephen, is that, as you know...
Jonathan.
All right.
Stephen.
So, Poppy, you can go back. I debated a lot of people on this network during the campaign, and almost all the liberal economists said, if Donald Trump is elected president, he will crash the stock market. Some of the leading liberal economists, of course, we all know that didn't happen. He didn't crash the stock market. Since Election Day, the stock market is up 38%. That's a $6 trillion increase in American wealth.
Wait. Hold on, Stephen Moore, because you bring up what all these people, liberal economists, you call them, say about the stock market. Let's just listen for a moment to what the president said about the stock market in a presidential debate in September of 2016. His words, listen.
We're in a bubble right now, and the only thing that looks good is the stock market, but if you raise interest rates even a little bit, that's going to come crashing down. We are in a big, fat, ugly bubble.
What?
Poppy, the reason we're talking about this as a story is because Donald Trump, who's an ignoramus when it comes to policy, is so insensitive to his public perception that he has to go around and talk about a falsehood. Markets are up all over the world. Stock markets have been rising everywhere, in Asia, in Europe, in Japan. Donald Trump has had no effect on that.
None?
That has affected...
How can you argue? Hold on.
No.
How can you look? I'm not an economist, but I cover business and I cover markets. Jonathan, how can you argue that a president has no impact whatsoever on a market? You've got unemployment at a 17-year low. You've got consumer confidence at the highest level it's been since 2000. If President Obama gets credit for that market, how does President Trump not get some credit for this market?
But Poppy, the unemployment rate has been declining for way before Donald Trump took office.
Yeah, but it didn't start going up under President Trump.
Look, the best way of saying this is if the shoe were on the other foot, if we were sitting here with a Democratic president for 1 year, and an 8-year previous term for a Republican president, Stephen Moore would be scoffing at the notion that in 1 year any president could have any effect on the stock market.
Here's what Stephen Moore just wrote. Here's what Stephen Moore just wrote in his new piece for Investor Business Daily. You wrote, Stephen, it's possible the market exuberance is over. Mr. Trump's deregulation and tax cuts policies have run too far ahead. I mean, you've even said this market may be too hot.
That's right. And what I was saying is, look, this market loves Trump's policies, no question about it. He's a very pro-business president. He does know a lot about business. I think that's one of the reasons small business and investor confidence are up so high. But sure, I mean, I'm not going to predict where the stock market is going to go from here. I do worry maybe it's run a little bit ahead of itself. It's now knocking on the door of 25,000. That's a big number. But I will say this, it's not really for most Americans about the stock market, although I think that's a positive thing. Look at all the other indicators. I mean, this economy is red hot right now. I mean, it's hard to point to any single economic indicator that is not
true,
pointing
Stephen.
straight north.
All right, we have to leave it there. I would just say we really have to leave it there. Seriously, we have to leave it there.
More workers still are out of the workforce than before.
That's true.
The economy,
we need
most people, and wages are too low.
All right.
Wages are too.
Okay. We're leaving it there, but I'm glad you brought up wages because wage growth has not kept up with the run in the market, and half of Americans don't have a penny. Half of Americans don't have a penny in the stock market, so it's nice for them to look at, but it doesn't impact their reality. Got to get to break.
Indicator in the stock market.
You guys can continue this in the break. I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
Happy New Year.
All right, so out front next.